Welcome to episode 3 on Ireland's Magdalene Laundries. I've got to put my usual disclaimer here. This series is made for educational purposes. I've researched and gathered information from a wide array of sources, including official reports, which we're going to look at today, also Justice for Magdalene's research website and other websites, plus books, articles, documentaries, anywhere I could find it. I do not mean to insult or disrespect anyone I speak about here. I've also got to put a warning here. I am going to be talking about institutional abuse, servitude, forced labour, also physical, psychological and sexual abuse. So if you find any of these things too difficult to listen to, this episode is not going to be for you. But I really do hope to see you back in a future episode. So if you've been following along with me, thank you. If you haven't yet seen episode 1 and 2, I urge you to go look at those now and then come back here, because they really do lay the foundation of what we're talking about here. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the case files contained in the IDC report, also known as the Meticulous report, and it is the resulting report of the 18-month-long investigation into state involvement with the Magdalene Laundries. So this is from the state's perspective, and we will be going through the routes of entry that are published in the IDC report. This led to the state apology given on the 13th of February 2013. This report was published 2 weeks prior, on the 5th of February 2013. So the IDC found that the occupants of the Magdalene Laundries were from the criminal justice system, industrial and reformatory schools, health authorities and social services, at priests' recommendation or insistence, and family referrals. And Justice for Magdalene's uncovered many cases of girls and women being sent from mother and baby homes sometime following the birth of their child. This included cross-border from the Free State to Northern Ireland, and it was often between the same religious congregations. My next series is going to be on Ireland's mother and baby homes, including again the forced labour and servitude, the forced adoptions, both cross-border and to other parts of the world, and the medical trials carried out on the children. For now, let's continue with Ireland's Magdalene Laundries. So you are welcome to a drop in the ocean. And let's dive in.
He said it's just a drop in the ocean. Why would anyone notice? What a strange thing to say, you river away from ulterior motives. Just a drop in the ocean. What a horrible notion, that I'm just a drip in the wave of your much harder day in your life with your way bigger problems.
There's crossover between all the routes of entry to the Magdalene Laundries in the IDC report. So I'm going to take some case files from the IDC report to show you the official records held on why girls and women ended up there. I will often be directly quoting from the IDC report, so I just want to clarify the language they use in the IDC report. It is not the language I would use. For example, they refer to the girls and women's incarceration as their time spent or their residence or being residents of. So I just want you to understand the words I use here, they're not my own. Also, I'm going to be listing where available dates, ages, reasons for admittance, duration of stay. And the reason I'm doing this is because even at the time of this report's publication, the lines of information I read out, that data is the only information available to the girls and women who had spent time in the Magdalene Laundries. When the women would go back looking for records of when they were in the laundries, this is the only information they would get. So when they would look for their personal records, they would often just get this one line of information. The only additional information that would be on it is the name or the number that they were referred to as in the laundry. Because generally, on entering a Magdalene Laundry, the girls would have their hair cut, they would have their names taken, and they would be given a new name or a number or both they would have their clothes taken. So basically, they would be literally stripped of their identities. It's also a reason why women found it impossible to find each other afterwards, because they didn't know each other's real names or anything about each other. So this name or number would also have been included on the little piece of information they would receive. While I'm going through these details, I feel it's very important to remember that each and every single line I read out here, it's a life and sometimes a lifetime. It can't be refuted that entrance to a Magdalene Laundry changed the course of someone's life forever. Magdalene Laundries in Ireland were used as an alternative to prison for girls and women. The IDC found that one of the routes of entry was through the criminal justice system. The IDC report showed that girls and women entered the Magdalene Laundries through the criminal justice system for remand, probation, courts, prison, and on Garda Síochána, the Irish police. The offences these girls and women were being accused of included everything from not paying for a train ticket to having been intoxicated to murder and everything in between. Remember, this is just through the criminal justice system. Records from Dublin, the capital of Ireland, were not available to the IDC. Records from Limerick, one of our larger cities, were not available to the IDC. And remember, the Magdalene Laundry in Galway didn't have any records, and the Magdalene Laundry in Dunleary had only partial records. Also, these records did not include any girls or women who entered prior to 1922 and remained thereafter, of which there were many, often until they died. These case studies are taken both from official state records identified by the committee and from the religious congregations which operated the Magdalene Laundries, but not from the survivors. The IDC states that no women admitted to the Magdalene Laundries by any of the other routes of entry detailed in Part 3, so we're talking about county and city homes, prison, remand and probation, or psychiatric hospitals, came forward to describe the circumstances of their admission to or their experience of living and working there. However, there was not a public invitation for people to come forward at the time of the IDC. Justice for Magdalene's requested a few times that the IDC speak with the women to form a fuller perspective. So the survivors that were in contact with Justice for Magdalene's were invited. The IDC spoke to women from 2 other advocacy groups too, I believe. But there was never a public invitation to the women who had actually lived inside these places to come forward and speak with the IDC. On remand. Remand consists of those girls and women who were sent to the Magdalene Laundries while awaiting a court date. So this would predominantly be for a very short time, perhaps 1 or 2 days, but it could be for longer. It wasn't always recorded on the records that the girls and women were there for remand, but often the exit reason would show that it was for remand, and I believe that's why each one I read out here were put into this section. And please let's remember, each line I read out, it was the actual life of a young girl or a woman. In the 1930s, a 19-year-old brought by the guards, no reason or time recorded, incarcerated for 1 week, brought by the guards to court. And this is a typical example of people on remand, what records were kept. In the 1930s, a girl of unknown age, sent by the judge, she only came for 1 night from prison. In the 1940s, a 22-year-old sent by the judge, reason for stealing, no time recorded, there for 1 night, she broke a window and the sergeant took her away. In the 1950s, an 18-year-old sent by a superintendent, no reason or time recorded, she was there for a few months, the same superintendent instructed to send her home to her father to await court. In the 1960s, a 16-year-old brought by the guards, no reason or time recorded, there for 7 days, Garda took her away to court. In the 1960s, a 16-year-old sent by the judge on remand. She was there for 2 days, taken to Mountjoy prison for causing great trouble. In the 1960s, a 16-year-old sent by the judge on remand, there for 1 night, taken home by parents. In the 1970s, a 14-year-old sent by the guards on remand. She was there for 3 days. She ran away with no fixed abode. In the 1970s, a 15-year-old sent by a superintendent on remand. She was there for 6 days. She was not convicted, so she did not return. Before we go through the case files of girls and women sent to the Magdalene Laundries on probation, I'm going to explain a couple of things to you. I'll briefly explain some of the nuns' reward system as it comes up in the following records. If a girl or woman in the Magdalene Laundries were shown to be behaving themselves, there were rewards in place. So one of these rewards involved becoming a child of Mary or getting the blue ribbon. This would involve a sermon, essentially be christened a child of Mary. There may have been some small rewards included if you were a child of Mary, but there's very little account of it. I believe I read an oral history on Justice for Magdalene's research website where one lady referred to a child of Mary not having to go to recreational time. Remember, recreational time was where their second job was. So this lady was making rosary beads and Aran sweaters, while one of the other women she was with had become a child of Mary and therefore got to go to bed. Apart from this, there doesn't seem to be really any other benefit, but it would have been a huge privilege to many of them to be labelled a child of Mary. Then the other reward system was survivors have spoken about becoming consecrates, also referred to as auxiliaries. Now this meant you got your black dress, or in some cases a navy dress. And it also meant that you were voluntarily agreeing to stay with the nuns. So many consecrates would have died behind the walls, but far from all of the girls and women who died behind the walls were consecrates. Also, we have heard from survivors that in some laundries, some of the consecrates seemed to be tasked with dealing out punishments. I heard one survivor speak about on entry to the Magdalene Laundry, she was met by 2 auxiliaries or consecrates and they proceeded to beat her. And when they were finished, she was joined by 2 more new girls and they were also black and blue, so she believes they had also gone through the same thing. Remember, they were not allowed to speak in the laundries, so she couldn't ask them. But please understand, I'm not saying all auxiliaries did this, not by any means, but in some instances, in some of the laundries, this seemed to be something they were tasked with. Because of there being such a strict regime in the laundries, that institutionalization was a huge problem. You can imagine not even being allowed to speak and being inside for a few years with the beratements and everything else we have heard of. Women didn't know how to cope outside of the laundries and feared, a really real fear of going outside the laundries, and they would end up staying inside. Ireland's Magdalene Laundries were used as an alternative to prison for girls and women. The courts offered a term in a Magdalene Laundry as an alternative to a prison sentence. Now, girls and women snapped up this opportunity, believing that it would be much better to go to an institution run by a religious order than to accept a prison sentence, even though the time they were sentenced to in a Magdalene Laundry was much longer than what they would have received in prison. But they were unaware of what they were getting into and the stigma that would follow them on exiting the laundry. In a debate on the 1960 Criminal Justice Bill, Senator Nora Connolly O'Brien declared that if I were asked to advise girl delinquents, no matter what offences they were charged with, whether to go to prison on remand or to go to St. Mary Magdalene's Asylum on remand, I would advise them wholeheartedly to choose prison, because I think having a record of being in prison as a juvenile delinquent would not be so detrimental to the afterlife of the girl as to have it legally recorded that she was an inmate of St. Mary Magdalene's Asylum. And this was from the 13th of July 1960. And remember, the last Magdalene Laundry closed its doors in 1996. Throughout modern Irish history, we see where many people, probation officers for example, or even members of the government, mostly women, but not limited to, tried to speak out against sending especially young girls, but anyone, to a Magdalene Laundry. But unfortunately no one listened. Nothing happened to change it. It fell on deaf ears. In 1933, a 17-year-old was sent by the courts in a carriage of Great Southern Railway without having paid her fare, so she had no train ticket, time given 12 months, no record of an exit date as this was Dunleary. 1935, a 39-year-old sent by the courts, convicted of loitering and soliciting for the purpose of prostitution. She got 12 months, there for an unknown time, but during her incarceration she was brought before the court for a similar offence and went to prison. In 1935, a 17-year-old sent by the courts for stealing. She got 12 months. The IDC report states she was employed as a domestic servant before her release date. In 1936, a 17-year-old sent by the courts for stealing. She got 2 years and she remained there for some time after the end of her period of probation. We have no exit date. In 1936, a 16-year-old sent by the courts for stealing. She got 12 months working in the laundry, no exit date. In 1936, a 19-year-old sent by the courts, convicted of committing an act in such a way as to offend modesty or cause scandal or injure the morals of the community. She got 12 months. She's listed as a maternity case. It is recorded she did have her baby in Pelletstown Mother and Baby Home. The final information on record for her was that she was later ill in Union Hospital with rheumatism. In 1936, a 19-year-old sent by the courts for stealing. There's a note to reside in High Park Convent as long as probation officer consents. She was down for 12 months. She was there for 3 months. The note says, girl delicate, father written to, came to Dublin and brought his daughter home. In 1936, a 21-year-old sent by the courts, larceny. She got 12 months. 6 years later, she became a consecrate. She received the black dress and stayed in the nun's care after the laundry closed. In 1936, a 21-year-old was sent by the courts for stealing. She got 6 months. She was working in the laundry, first in St. Patrick's and later in High Park, no exit date. In 1936, a 16-year-old sent by the courts, convicted of committing in a public place an act contrary to public decency. She got 12 months. We have no exit date. In 1936, a 16-year-old sent by the courts for loitering and soliciting for the purpose of prostitution. She got 12 months. She remained on voluntarily. No exit date. In 1936, presumed sister to the aforementioned, an 18-year-old sent by the courts for loitering and soliciting for the purpose of prostitution. She got 12 months. She was placed in a situation on leaving in a private hotel, but left and went home, now at a homeless hostel. In 1936, a 32-year-old sent by the courts for stealing. She got 3 years. She remained for 16 years. In 1936, a 15-year-old was sent by the courts, found living in circumstances calculated to cause, encourage or favour her seduction or prostitution. She got 2 years and she remained there for 2 years. Let's just for a moment put ourselves in the shoes of a young girl living in Ireland in the 20th century, in a town or city, in a poverty-stricken house. No work for your parents, or if there is work, it's with little pay, little or no food in the house. Begging could get you sent to the Magdalene Laundries. Stealing could get you sent to the Magdalene Laundries. Being attractive could get you sent there, or if you were considered flirtatious, even as a young girl, or if one or both of your parents or guardians are abusive, or if one or especially both of them die, and God forbid if you have sex, because that was the worst thing of all. And that applies in any capacity, whether it was your choice to have sex or not. So let's say your stepfather has been horrifically abusing you for years, physically, psychologically, sexually, and you tell. Maureen Sullivan was 12 when her teacher, a nun, coaxed her with a lovely box of posh chocolates, in Maureen's words, into eventually telling her what her stepfather had been doing to her. Maureen didn't know what he was doing. She didn't know it was sexual abuse. All she knew is that he was hurting her. And she eventually told this nun, her teacher, how he was hurting her. So with that, Maureen was put out in the corridor. The nun ran off. The parish priest was called. And there was a note sent home to Maureen's mother. Maureen's mother came back into the school with Maureen, and she was informed Maureen would be going to a brand new school in the morning, one where she could stay. Maureen's mother was devastated. She ran out that evening and bought Maureen a brand new pencil case for her new school. Maureen had never had anything new before, so this pencil case was special. And it became somewhat of an obsession, understandably, as this was the moment Maureen's life changed forever. Maureen's education finished that day. Maureen was not to go to a new school. Maureen was to go to a Magdalene Laundry. So let's hear a little bit from Maureen, because this is Maureen Sullivan's book, Girl in the Tunnel, and it's about Maureen's life, including her time in 3 different Magdalene Laundries from the age of 12. I said, excuse me, I want to go back to Carlo, and she ignored me again. I ran up to her. One of the women tried to catch me as I passed her, to pull me back, seeing what I was doing was not going to end well, but she didn't manage to reach out in time, and I caught up to the nun. Excuse me, I said. I want to go back now. I want to go to Carlo. She ignored me, and so I reached out and took her sleeve and pulled it. And because I was small and running, it created a momentum that spun her around and knocked her a little. She stood on her own skirt and almost fell, and when she steadied herself, well, the anger within her was beyond anything you could imagine. The nuns were so unhappy, so understimulated, and institutionalized themselves. Violence erupted in them so easily. And it did then. She got me by the hair and pushed me back into the wall, ramming her other arm up and into my neck. She bared her teeth and pulled and pushed until my face was turned sideways and I was totally pinned there. You'll observe silence, she seethed. I want to go home to Carlo. Sister Cecilia said I could, I said. I don't care what Sister whoever said to you, the nun said. There is no talking here, you'll be quiet. Another nun, one of the older, fatter ones I'd seen rarely, usually only in Mass, appeared then. Her eyes flashed when she saw the scene in front of her. I struggled against her. I kicked out. Why wouldn't they let me go to school? What was I even here for? The second nun rounded in on me, with a hard slap to the side of my face and another in quick succession to my shoulder. I wriggled and dropped my weight, slid out of the first nun's grasp and onto the floor. But they dropped too, got on top of me, and they started to slap me over and over. The more I howled, the harder the slaps got. Silence, they said, with each hard slap. I want to go to home. I want my pencil case. I said it over and over, determined not to be broken, determined to make myself understood. I did not want to stay. Why were they making me stay? Sister Cecilia said I could come home. They slapped me and slapped me and slapped me. You'll be silent, I was told. You're not going back to Carlo. Nobody wants you in Carlo. Your mother dumped you here and not even she wants you. They were lying and I told them so. They slapped and slapped. The other women watched them do it. Watched as they stood me back up each time they thought they had me defeated. And watched me tell them again, I want to go to Carlo. I want my pencil case. They watched them slap me down again, instructing me to keep silent, pushing me onto my knees and forcing me to do penance for sins I didn't commit. I kept getting to my feet and they'd slap and push me back. They wanted to break me. I'm going to read one more small bit because I think Maureen has a message here that is very important. The Magdalene Laundries weren't refuges. They were prisons, places of punishment. They were workhouses, chain gangs, slave labour camps. They made slaves of us. They sold us and sold our babies. They abused us, hid us away. They let many of us die. I've been attacked so many times for speaking out. Even those close to me have shouted at me in the street, called me names and said I'm looking for attention. I will speak my truth. I will share my experience as a Magdalene survivor, because Ireland still holds as dear as ever so many of the ideals that landed me there. I owe nobody silence. You can tell your story and let me tell mine. Maureen, please don't ever stop telling your story. Maureen would be trafficked to another Magdalene laundry and then another, and she would be 16 when she left, just like the girls sent on school licence from the school manager, which we'll talk about. Maureen got to leave because she asked to be paid for her work. Her suitcase was packed for her. With a free state plagued by poverty, pregnancy outside of wedlock was classed as a mortal sin. Contraception was made illegal in 1935, abortion illegal, sexual abuse and rape punishable for the victim. Infanticide was not uncommon at this time in Ireland, nor was prostitution, which was also illegal, although the prostitution was not new. We were known to have the largest red light district in Europe. However, following the formation of the Free State, with a strict and heavy Catholic influence, a prostitute was seen as a site of possible contagion, both physical and morally. Prevention became key. In 1946, a 26-year-old was sent by the courts for the willful murder of her unnamed female infant. We have more information on this lady. She got 6 months imprisonment, suspended on condition that she entered into recognizance and keep the peace for a period of 2 years in the sum of £20, and entered Gloucester Street Convent for a term of 15 months. 6 months after her entry to the Magdalene Laundry at Sean McDermott Street, the woman's father wrote to the Minister for Justice, requesting that his daughter be released of the obligation to remain in Gloucester Street Convent for a term of 15 months. The petition confirms that the woman's family, and presumably the woman herself, was in contact with the named probation officer while she was in the Magdalene Laundry. It was she who suggested that they petition the minister for her release from the Magdalene Laundry, in which the court had required that she reside. The first step taken by the Minister for Justice was to request the Chief Probation Officer to make inquiries, with a view to asserting whether it would be in the best interests of the girl to order her release now, and whether the offer of employment was genuine. The Chief Probation Officer submitted a memorandum in response to this request. The Probation Officer's memorandum also includes details of the position of the religious congregation concerned, with whom it is clear the Probation Officer had consulted. The memorandum recorded that the nuns in the convent say that the girl in question is very satisfactory, apart from certain shortness of temper which she displays periodically. She is highly recommendable. She is naturally reticent and never discusses her affairs with the other inmates. She is apparently very happy there, and the move for her early release has been made by her relatives, who evidently think she has been detained for what they think is a reasonable period. The nuns think that the girl would be much the better for a longer period under their supervision. They say that the training there has had a refining influence on her, and that the longer the period, the more lasting will be the effect. They do not suggest that she should remain there for the full 15 months, but they suggest, with respect, that the time for a release is scarcely opportune right now. She should, they think, be left there for some time longer. And so the original sentence was 15 months, and she spent 9 months in the Magdalene Laundry. However, she would only have received 6 months in prison. In 1968, a 17-year-old sent by the courts for stealing a watch. She got 2 months as she pled guilty. There's no record of an exit date. In 1926, we don't have an age. She was sent by the courts for infanticide. She got 12 months and was subsequently taken to Dublin by her sister. In 1932, we don't have an age, got sent by the courts for murdering an unnamed infant child. She got 18 months. She spent over 3 years in the Magdalene Laundry. In 1937, we don't have an age, but she is noted as a girl, sent by the courts, reason recorded larceny. She got 12 months. We have another little bit of information on this one. The records of the religious congregation confirm that the girl entered the Magdalene Laundry in Cork, but was within a few days transferred to the Magdalene Laundry in Limerick. After approximately 3 weeks, she was dismissed from the laundry. She was sent away for bad conduct. In 1937, unknown age, sent by the courts for larceny. She stole a watch and clothing. She got 12 months. She remained until death. She became a consecrate. In 1937, a 13-year-old sent by the courts for larceny. She got 2 years. She left after 2 years. In 1937, an unknown age sent by the courts for attempted suicide. She got 2 years and left after 2 years. In 1945, an unknown age sent by the courts for larceny. She got 6 months, and we have a note. The note says that this lady had no relatives and had been reared in a named industrial school. She became a consecrate. She received the black dress 8 years after entering the Magdalene Laundry. So she in fact spent over 30 years in the Magdalene Laundry. In 1953, an unknown age, sent by the courts for infanticide. She was to spend no less than 6 months and no more than 12. She was there for 2.5 years. In the 1920s, a 19-year-old was sent by the courts for stealing a watch. We don't know what she was given, but she spent 5 years in the Magdalene Laundry. In the 1940s, an unknown age sent from Mountjoy prison. We don't have a reason. She was given 3 years and she died of consumption, tuberculosis. In 1941, a 22-year-old was sent by the courts, no reason recorded. She got 2 years. We don't have an exit date. We don't know what year a 28-year-old was sent by the courts on a suspended sentence. She got 2 years. We don't have an exit date. In the 1950s, a 19-year-old was sent by the courts for stealing a bicycle and attempting suicide. She got 1 year and she spent 1 year there. And then from the prisons, we have very little information regarding why they came from the prisons or anything else about them. I'll just show you an example of that. In the 1920s, we don't know what age she was sent by the prison. We don't know why, what time she was given, or how long she was incarcerated in the Magdalene Laundry for. And then we don't know what year, we don't know what age, sent by the nuns from prison. We don't have a reason, a time given, or how long she spent inside. And then some prison records from the religious congregations. We see where a woman entered a Magdalene Laundry, brought by the matron of Limerick Prison in the 1920s. She remained there approximately 6 months. A woman entered a Magdalene Laundry, having been brought by sisters who visited the city prison. Her parents were believed to be living in New York. A woman entered a Magdalene Laundry, recorded as a self-referral from the prison in the 1930s. She remained there almost 3 years. Dr. Karen Brennan in 2013 explores sentencing of women convicted of infanticide offences at the Central Criminal Court between 1922 and 1949. A sample of 124 cases involving women who had been convicted of manslaughter, concealment of birth, or child abandonment or child cruelty after appearing at the Central Criminal Court on a charge of murdering their newly or recently born infant. In the abstract, Dr. Karen Brennan notes, the court records show that a notable aspect of sentencing practice in these Irish infanticide cases is the use of non-penal religious institutions, mostly convents, as an alternative to traditional custody. Despite the fact that the offences these women were convicted of were all punishable by imprisonment or penal servitude, 47.6% of cases, which was 59 in total, where a woman was sentenced for an infanticide-related offence, did not attract a custodial penalty. In 5 of these cases, the offender was discharged without conditions. In one other case, the woman was discharged on the basis of an undertaking entered by a third party. In the remaining 53 cases, the accused was released on entering a recognizance to abide by particular conditions. In 93.2% of cases involving institutional detention, the period specified was between 1 and 2 years. The terms imposed were 3 months in one case, 12 months in 35 cases, 15 months in 2 cases, 18 months in 14 cases, 2 years in 17 cases, and 3 years in 3 cases. I thought I'd read this out to you because we don't see anyone in the IDC report receive 3 years for these crimes, but it's highly likely it was Magdalene Laundries these women were put into. And it's interesting how a Magdalene asylum is considered a lesser sentence to prison. They were certainly used in some cases, many cases, as penal institutions. For further reading, see Chapter 10 of the IDC report, as it states all the existing laws at the time, permitting Garda to be very involved with the Magdalene Laundries. Again, from the IDC report, the committee found cases of informal placements of girls and women by the Gardaí, and in some cases probation officers, which occurred without a court process. We have also known for many years that if a girl or woman escaped from a Magdalene laundry, the Gardaí would apprehend them and return them to the laundry. This has been widely dismissed by the state, as remember the state had absolutely no part to play in the Magdalene laundries, so the Gardaí wouldn't have been involved. In the 1923 Garda handbook, it read, "Persons in institution uniform. If persons are noticed to be wandering about in the uniform of institutions, example workhouse inmates, they should be questioned, and if they cannot give a satisfactory account of themselves, they should be arrested." When questioned by the IDC for the report, the Gardaí suggest that it may refer to the power of arrest at common law for the larceny of the uniform. This was a regular incident that Gardaí had to deal with, and indeed some Garda records show that people have received convictions for larceny of apparel. A subsequent Garda code, dating to 1928, refers to the role of the Gardaí in relation to the poor laws. Gardaí were called on to give institutional assistance, which may have involved dealing with escorts and missing persons from time to time. The Garda report to the IDC notes that Section 68 of the Children Act 1908 provides that where a licence granted to a person under the supervision of the manager of a certified school is revoked, such person may be apprehended without warrant and brought back to such school. It is noted in the report that girls were unaware of this Children Act 1941, so essentially they could be apprehended without warrant or forewarning by the Gardaí and placed in a Magdalene laundry, with no knowledge of what's going on, at the request of the school manager. I'll explain this more in this section on industrial and reformatory schools. Let's talk about this photograph. This photo has been widely and commonly used in the media as it demonstrates the Gardaí on each side of Magdalene Laundry girls and women preventing their escape. The IDC decided to investigate this photo. The response from the Gardaí said in part, "The Gardaí are in attendance in veneration of Our Lady and for no other reason." The priest that is actually in this photograph was also questioned. The priest said, "It wouldn't be related to the girls coming from the convent in my view." There was no attempt to contact any of the women pictured to hear their version of events. So it appears it was simply a coincidence that the Gardaí happened to be walking on either side of the Magdalene Laundry inmates. Lastly, in Chapter 10, the nuns contributed more of their records. From the IDC report, the records of the religious congregations also provide further insight to informal and temporary placements of this kind. For example, now remember, all the nuns' records were handed back to them. We have never been allowed access to their records. And all of these records from the IDC report are just the ones they chose to show us. A 37-year-old woman of no fixed abode was admitted to a Magdalene Laundry in the 1940s, having been found straying after an identified event. She was discharged a few days after arrival. A 17-year-old girl was, in the 1950s, brought by the guards to a Magdalene Laundry, having been in a city a few hours away from her home address. After approximately a week, she was taken home by her mother. A 17-year-old girl in the 1950s was brought by the guards having run away from home. She left a few days later. Someone came for her after a few days. A 12-year-old girl from a named country location was in Dublin and brought by the guards to a Magdalene Laundry in the late 1950s. 2 days later, she was taken by the guards to get a train home. A 16-year-old girl from Belfast was brought by a Garda to a Magdalene Laundry in the 1960s. She was sent back to Belfast the next day. A 16-year-old girl whose mother was dead was brought by a named Garda to a Magdalene Laundry in the 1960s, after running away from home with a boyfriend with a jail record. She was taken home by her father the following day. A 16-year-old girl from a named country town was removed by Garda from flat of ill repute and placed in a Magdalene Laundry in the 1960s. She remained there for 6 days, after which she went to job. An 11-year-old girl who was recorded as having a home address in Belfast was brought by Gardaí in Dublin to a Magdalene Laundry in the 1960s. She was taken home the next day. A 13-year-old girl was brought by Gardaí to a Magdalene Laundry in the 1960s. She was taken home the following day. A girl whose age was not recorded ran away from home and brought by Garda to a Magdalene Laundry in the 1960s. She was collected by parents the same day. A 15-year-old girl was referred to a Magdalene Laundry in the 1970s by the Garda in charge of youth in the city. Her parents are recorded as being in a different city to her. She left after 1 week. She ran away. The Magdalene Laundries were extremely well-kept secrets. People did not know what they actually were. Some people were well aware. All the Gardaí involved, they knew, and probably their families. As with anyone involved with the whole judicial system, they knew. Probation officers, they knew. But it was a secret. In the general public, there were rumours, but just rumours. Girls and women who had been inside and who got out, they didn't speak about it. Shame-filled and guilt-filled, with shattered confidence, they kept their incarceration as a secret and often brought it with them to their grave. We can't give back to these women what we took from them, but we can stop it from ever happening to anyone ever again. Even just by going through what we looked at today, the girls and women who were put in the Magdalene Laundries through the criminal justice system, it was proven that the state were heavily involved. and the girls and women definitely were not allowed to leave. It explains the high walls, the locked gates, the locked doors, even to their cell or to their dormitory at night. They were not allowed to leave. And perhaps it goes some way towards explaining the punitive, abusive nature of the Magdalene Laundries. Are we to believe that some women were held there, not allowed to leave, and that others could leave of their own free will? How is that even possible? In episode 4, we'll move on through the other routes of entry contained in the IDC report. This is very important stuff. I want to cover as much as I can, and we need to know what happened, the truth. Because believe it or not, it's once again being denied that these were abusive institutions, that the state were responsible for the girls and women, and that the women were not there by choice, that they were free to leave. I've been asked in the comments, what about the religious congregations? Are we not going to mention them? And yes, I certainly will be covering that aspect of everything. Thank you so much for following along with me. I know it's not easy to research and it's not easy to listen to, but it's so important. And thank you to everyone who subscribed. Please give this video the thumbs up, everybody. That's what helps it get pushed out to more viewers. And thank you to everyone who commented on the previous episodes. It's great to see the conversations going on in the comments. That's exactly what we need. Stay talking, everyone. Keep this current. Keep the awareness going. Thank you so much. Take care of yourselves and good luck.